Good morning. Okay, so a couple things happened this week I want to talk about, and I'm going to tie it all into IO, and I've got a bunch of stuff to cover. But did I introduce you to my cookie, Emmanuel? Did I tell you guys about my cookie? Okay, so remember how I told you that the universal sort of energy I equate to like a big cookie dough, and that we're just a little sort of plop. And since we've all established that we're all narcissists, I decided to buy myself a reminder of my narcissism, warts and all. So I got this on Etsy, and it's like a reminder. And when I tell you that my chocolate chip leadership theory and I talk about, you know, the disciples and the archetypes, I think of like the cookie chips, and here I have my king needs counsels. So I bought this sort of as a reminder that I'm not the entire cookie dough, but that I'm just a plop of cookie dough, and that I can love myself, warts and all. So because this class is about really using the workspace to develop self-love qualities, and of course, use the people in your work environment to learn and grow from, that kind of reminds me. So when I have judgments, I immediately like look at the cookie dough and I go through my spiritual TED talk and I'm like, oh, well, I'm that too. And then it's easy to just let go. So it's just kind of like a visual reminder that I got for myself. So today we're going to cover a bunch of different things. And like I said before, I'm going to kind of maybe zigzag and be all over the place, but it will kind of all tie together to IO psychology. The universal laws that we're going to talk about are mentalism and correspondence. So just to remind you, the principle of mentalism is all is mind. So that's kind of like the universal cookie dough. And so you being sort of one aspect of this universal space, it's your sort of job, if you will, in this world to make your cookie dough shine, to find a way to express your divinity through what I say, divinity through your humanity, your body, and we're going to talk about that a bit today. And remembering that everything's in your head. All of this is happening in your mind. The other is the law of correspondence, which I use repeatedly, especially in the workplace, where is after my sort of initial judgment, I've told you this before, I then go to, why did I bring this into my level of consciousness? So this is a belief that I have. What we allow into our sphere of consciousness is intentional. And I use the word sphere, intentional. We're going to talk a little bit about leadership theories. And I showed you last week those triangular ones where it's like service leadership or sort of regular leadership. And I know hierarchy exists in the earthly realm. I'm not denying that and the need for it. And obviously, in a basic way, just parents to their children, right? Children don't need friends. They need parents up until a certain age. But in spirituality, there is no hierarchy. The universe is cyclical and spherical. What was that?
We technically don't have free will. It's like our spirituality is all that's basically our decision for us. Like that's it.
Well, we do have free will, but we have to identify that a lot of what happens is determinism.
So basically,
right. And so it's when we can think as an adult, which is the whole purpose of this month, this archetype of Saturn, or the Senex archetype, the wise adult person, of course, right? But we understand that so much is determined, what Emmanuel's saying, but it's using this law of principle of mentalism to say, wait a minute, I get to choose at this moment. But if you're not aware of your programming, then you can't show up for yourself. Exactly. So the correspondence law, and why I wrote this about what we allow into our sphere of consciousness, is intentional. So one of the things that I do is immediately I have the thought, the impure thought, I'm better, you know, I know more than you, whatever my thought is, because the thought never goes away. Remember, we are conceived on an impure thought. So whether it's pride or gluttony or envy or greed, whatever that thought is that, you know, sort of parents tried hiding from you and trying to teach you a value system that counteracted that, the reality is that thought enters your consciousness level immediately when you're engaging with another person, especially at work. So if you can identify and let it go, then you can be present, which is the law of correspondence, for what's showing up in your consciousness. So when I stop to talk to someone at work, I'm saying, I am choosing this moment. I am choosing very intentionally that I'm allowing this person or this situation or this document into my sphere of consciousness. And because I have the law of mentalism, and that hierarchy doesn't really exist in spirituality, but rather that the universe is cyclical, I'm like, okay, this is a sphere of consciousness. I'm the center of that. And I'm allowing this in because there's something for me to learn from it. So that's sort of how I approach most situations, if not all, but primarily my work life, because I have an understanding that this is where I'm going to be, according to the archetype of Saturn, for 30, 40, 50 years, where it's going to be the space where I learn conformity and growth and so forth. So that's a big part of today. So in mythology, there are the charits, or the charities. We've talked about those before. And one of them is eudaimonia. And so eudaimonia has been written about in several ways. Eudaimonia, the charity, good morning, of eudaimonia actually means happiness. I'm not a believer really in happiness. To me, happiness is fleeting moments. I'm more about contentment, joy, stability, balance, equanimity. I think that these are really what we're getting at when we talk about happiness or eudaimonia. It's more contentment. And so some things that are spoken about in philosophy is that virtues are states of the soul. Welfare, happiness, human flourishing, prosperity are sort of the determinants of happiness and or contentment, more so than achieving, let's say, financial prosperity or whatnot. These are things of the soul. And that's why this month is all about using the workplace to do your dharma, the workplace as the space where you can really exercise your own leadership in your own life, which is a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. So I call it integrative leadership or cyclical leadership. And I showed you last week my wheel, and we'll talk a little bit about the wheel today as well. So I have on the board Chief Enlightenment Officer or Energetic Officer, and we're going to talk about that, and Chief Originality Officer and Chief Ordinary Officer. So I want to kind of dethrone, if you will, the CEO and the COO. So we're going to get away from sort of the traditional, and we're going to look at it from more of a spiritual perspective. So something that I have on the board, I have Chief Enlightenment Officer linked to spirit. We're going to talk a little bit about shamanism and that philosophy. And Chief Energetic Officer. The Enlightenment Officer is more related to our spiritual and how we can show up in the workplace working on our spirit. And then the Chief Energetic Officer is more of the material aspect. It's the money, the resources, the time. And I'm going to talk about something called a no-sayer later, which is about managing your energy and setting boundaries, which is extremely important. In terms of the COO, yesterday, two things happened. I had a client and I started listening to him, and he kept telling me these words. I wonder if I have my notes here. Yeah, he kept using this verbiage a lot in our session: reimagining, refashioning, recrafting, repackaging. And I identified in his psyche that he was taking content and making it sort of packaging differently. But really, there wasn't a lot of originality to what he was doing. Now, you guys know my hashtag, no new stories. We're all living a myth. Basically, we're a living myth, but how we choose to live it is our original way. And so I identified with some archetypal language that there was a fear of being unoriginal. And so that's why I have this here. And one of the biggest fears that I hear in clients is being ordinary. So that was the morning. And then I went to the Van Gogh Immersion experience, which I highly recommend, in Miami. later that morning. And I was looking at the exhibit, and what was Van Gogh's entire identity? Tortured soul, tortured artist. He was put in an insane asylum. He chopped off his ear, like chaos, right? This was his claim to fame. So I learned yesterday when I started looking at archetypally, I was like, oh my God, this is fascinating. His last known painting is called Tree Roots. Well, the archetype of roots is Saturn. The archetype of roots is groundedness. So it's the exact spiritual adulting brain archetype of Saturn and Uranus. And I told you that a lot of people stay here and struggle with this. They want freedom from the prison that is their mortgage or their job or their family or whatnot, and we bounce back. And so this is the COO. How do you find a 48 to 52 between your originality and your ordinariness? And when I was reading sort of the breakdown of Van Gogh, after his known work, so listen to this guy, is a tortured artist, obviously extremely creative, obviously very original, right? Then his last known work, after I think he gets out of the insane asylum, is a work called Tree Roots, which is the archetype of Saturn, and he kills himself. And funny enough, he tries to kill himself in the heart, but he hits his third chakra, his stomach instead. So there's a lot of symbolism in there. So I wrote this in my Instagram post yesterday. His whole claim to fame, and most of us are like this, we want to be so original, but we don't know how. So what do? Is that we create chaos, because the archetype of Uranus is individuality, creativity, originality. But if you don't know how to do that, like my client earlier in the morning that hasn't yet grasped his original sort of version of himself, you tend to create chaos, which is a psychological orgasm. You create chaos, you create chaos, you create chaos in your job, in your family, wherever your point of entry is to the chaos. And then when you're proven correctly, I knew I was a loser, I knew I was gonna get fired, I knew she was gonna dump me, whatever your gas releases in the system, you get an orgasm from proving yourself correctly. And this is the vicious cycle of chaos and drama that we talk about. But it's all in an attempt to not be ordinary. And so when I'm following this guy's artwork and his last piece is Roots, it's almost like he had this moment of, oh my God, I'm just ordinary. I'm just an ordinary human. I can't be living. And he was 37 when he killed himself. And when we did the spiritual adulting ages, I told you that 36 and a half, your nodes are open. Personally, for me, I think 36 and a half is the best age. It's like sort of the setup for the rest of your life, especially spiritually, but even financially. And he kills himself with the nodes being open. It was almost as if this is the best time of my life. I just realized I'm ordinary within my extraordinariness, my originality and my ordinary sort of me. And he kills himself because he's like, I don't want to be human. Let me open the doors of the future, meaning go to heaven or going back to the universal cookie dough or the divinity. So when I started looking at his work and his whole timeline archetypally, it made so much sense. And this is a theme I see a lot in practice. I don't know yet how to individuate. I don't know yet how to be original. So instead, archetypally, the psyche at a low consciousness creates chaos as a way of being so different. I was talking to someone the other day, she goes, I'm so different. I'm like, no, you're really not. You're just chaotic. And when we start realizing that chaos is another word for the archetype of originality, we realize that we haven't really identified how to be original, and that's why we're creating all this chaos in our life. So that was a really interesting theme that I was seeing sort of woven through yesterday. And so it's about, through our work experience, finding that midpoint, that 48 to 52, between the originality, which is our divine spark, yet our ordinariness of being human. Where is that midpoint? And that really is a big function of your life. So you're the CEO of your life in this discovery process, or COO of your life in this discovery process. And obviously I'm playing on the word of COO, which is sort of the money manager type of guy, although that's, I guess, the financial guy, but the organizational, like how are you going to organize your resources, your time, your money, your self-worth? Which leads me to the CEO. The enlightenment is, okay, the divinity of how you're going to sort of use experiences like the law of correspondence to learn. If you allowed it into your sphere of consciousness, then this means that there's something for you to learn. This is how I use the law of correspondence. If I'm allowing this to enter my space, if I create everything, which I believe, then there's something in this for me. Then my ears perk up and I can become, quote unquote, enlightened from this person, from this document, from this email. And I never miss a beat in the attempt at enlightenment. That's the spirit or the divine aspect. The energetic, which I'll tie in a little bit later into the shamanism perspective, is the material. Your energy and how you use your energy is directly related to your self-worth. And what's your energy currency at work? Your money, how much you get paid, what you get as per the service that you provide. So how to manage your money is also linked, or your time or resources, because it's not just the financial money, is the energetic component to you being the CEO of your life. So here you see that at work, you get to show up as the leader all the time. And I wrote, and we'll get to that later, I call it the chairman of the horde. It's all about you, because then you can give back. We'll talk about that a bit. So Kierkegaard talks about to will one thing. And the whole point, besides learning how to die, the whole point of life is to take this dual nature of spirit and matter, of rational intellectual mind and our spiritual connection intuitively, and make it live as one, to be unified. So I'm not going to go into the law of gender today. We've covered that at length with Dionysus and the chakra system and so forth. But that's what Kierkegaard is saying. And the best place to actually will one thing, to become divine and matter, spirit and matter, divine and human, is through the works experience in our work world. So at work, we can unite ourselves in both the spiritual and the material. So I was talking to a client the other day who actually is in a spiritual job. And he's talking to me about work. And I'm like, you know that just because you work in a spiritual industry doesn't mean you're doing spiritual work, right? Like, we somehow think that if it's packaged as spirit, then it's spirit. So we're in higher education. If I'm not teaching and learning and doing my spiritual work as a result of the experience of teaching or being in academia, I'm not doing academics, or I'm not doing spiritual work. So the people in the office next door in the cubby or in financial aid, just because they're in academia doesn't mean they're doing academics. But for some reason, we think spiritually, if we're in a spiritual, sort of environment, the mere fact of being in a spiritual space, we're doing spiritual work. Spiritual work is inner work. It's understanding your thoughts, your emotions, your desires, like Emmanuel was saying, your free will. When you're showing up sort of predetermined based on patterns, limiting beliefs. This is why work is such the place where we grow and learn, and that Groundhog Day. Doesn't matter the industry you're in, it's what do you glean from that work environment for your self-improvement. And that's why with all of you, I'm like, when you see clients, after the client, you sit down and say, what was applicable to me? That's the spiritual aspect of the work. Does not matter what industry you're in. If you're in mechanics, if you're in finance, spirituality is the inner space. So St. Thomas Aquinas said, peace implied a twofold union, the result of one's own appetite being directed to one object. That's the purpose of the spiritual TED Talk. If you're at work or you're with a situation and you have the thought, the impure thought, I'm better than this person, and you work through that, in my case with my model or in any model you choose, and you let that go, You've now taken that thought, it no longer sort of penetrates your real estate in your mind, and you let it go. Then there's space, what he's calling peace, or I said earlier, eudaimonia, or happiness, or contentment, whatever word you want to use. Then there's space for the other. And he said the other, so the twofold process or the twofold union, is one's own appetite being united with an appetite of another. So what I have here is Jupiter and Venus. And again, Jupiter and Venus. So the CEO is linked to the Jupiter and the Venus archetype. This is your spiritual health, your gluttony. This is also your financial well-being, as is Venus. Both of these planets actually relate to both spiritual and wealth. It's not just spiritual growth. It is linked to your spiritual and your financial worth. So this is the part of you that's sort of the CEO, where the COO is, like I said before, the originality and the ordinariness. But these are major archetypes that we're working in with the work environment. So when St. Thomas says this about peace being twofold, the Venus archetype, I've told you before, is the circle of spirit and the cross of matter. The agape love, if we ever get there, love thy neighbor as thyself. That's when we're in true sort of charity, if you will, or true eudaimonia, where now we can love the other as ourselves. And I told you that kings need counsel. If you see yourself as the king or the CEO or the COO of your life, as it should be, you're always going to have the 12 archetypes, the 12 disciples. You know, the 12 Greek gods as a mirror to you archetypally in your workplace. One of these days, I'm not sure when, you guys familiar with that TV show, The Office? Okay, well, that show was like very popular. So I was talking to my daughter and another friend of mine that's kind of on the young end, and they love that show, and it was like a hit in Europe, and then it came here. So I'm going to take those characters, and I just have to kind of sit and get familiar with the archetypes of each of them to show you how in an office setting, all of those archetypes are there. And then you can kind of identify this in your life or your workspace. They're always there. You're always the king, literally, of your life. It's your throne, but that counsel is always around you. And so obviously this whole lecture and this whole class is about you becoming the leader of your own life, but using the work environment to do that so that you can use these experiences rather than burning you out and making you stressed or sick, that you can use them for your growth, spiritual and financial. So Aristotle said that the goal, eudaimonia or happiness or contentment, was human flourishing, the highest human good. So how is the best way you can show up? And so if you have this attitude that you make space for the other to sort of enter your consciousness, again, it could be an email, it can be a directive, it can be a meeting, or it can be another person, then you can really start living from that space of the highest good. And he said, the highest good of a thing consists of the good performance of its characteristic function, and the virtue or excellence of a thing consists of whatever traits or qualities enable it to perform that function well. So there's an example of a knife. A knife main function or highest function is to cut. So if you're not living from your originality, if you're not living from this enlightened state, if you're not living in a space where you allowed this to enter your consciousness and what can you glean from it, and this sort of chairman of the horde attitude, then you're missing opportunities to be your highest good and live your complete life. So I was at this, this Van Gogh thing yesterday with the graphic design teacher, and she kept talking about hierarchy and design. And so of course I hear that word, and I know again in the earthly world that there's hierarchy, but I'm like, I wonder why she keeps using this, this word hierarchy. So I asked her, I said, what is it that you're talking about in reference to design? And she's like, when she teaches the students to like lay out, let's say a website or something, it's an order where you're going to follow the eye. But then she spoke about the cyclical and the spherical. She goes, then you find the color, then you find the font, then you find the design sort of that's going to tie all of it together. And it's sort of the same metaphor of our work life. Yes, there's hierarchy. There is leadership. There is a chain of command. But then there's something that's woven, hopefully, throughout the entire organization that should be the mission, the vision, and the value system. It ties the entire organization, making it cyclical. So most organizations don't necessarily have this setup. The ones that you can read about are pretty popular ones online that have clearly written out a cool, vision statement, mission statement, and perhaps values. But a lot of places really limit their values to like integrity or honesty or boldness, but they don't really go into the crux of defining them. And we're going to talk about, in order to be the CEO of your life and the COO of your life, for you to, whatever hierarchy is in your life, whether it's your family or the position you hold at work, how do you tie in those other elements that make it cyclical and spherical, which is really the purpose of leadership. So I thought that was an important and very poignant metaphor. So I found this book called Gods of Management, The Changing Work of Organizations. It was published in 2009 by a gentleman by the name of Charles Handy. And what he did, he says that there were 4 types of cultures, and he modeled them after the Greek gods. So you know that made me excited. So what he says was Zeus is the king and father of the gods and rules the weather as well as law, order, and justice. So because he's the most powerful and strong god, he says that the organizational culture relating to Zeus has a strong dynamic leader with an entrepreneurial spirit. All lines of communication come from and going to him or her. So this is important in terms of our life. And I have Jupiter or Zeus under the CEO of your life. Okay, so obviously he's talking about the organization. I'm tying this in to yourself. So it all becomes sort of about you, so to speak. The next thing he says is Apollo. Apollo is more about rules, and that this type of organization is more rational and the roles are very clear cut and the procedures are very defined. Very important. This would tie into that Saturn archetype. You are divine, you are divine, but you're human and you have roles that you need to sort of have represented, if you will, in your life, just out of cleanliness or timeliness, these traditional sort of humanness things that we're obligated to. The next thing he said was Athena. He said Athena has to do with task, with solving problems, that it's calling on all resources, all departments to solve problems. And that's very inclusive. And that I have represented here as the CEO as Venus. Again, why did this show up, or how do we work together as a team? And again, going back to St. Thomas Aquinas or Aristotle, the other and being just as important as the self. And then lastly, he said that the 4th god was Dionysus. And Dionysus is wine and parties and festivals, and that this is an existential culture. This is sort of like a group engagement. And what I love about this is maybe this isn't the typical organization, but the way that, Charles Handy describes the Dionysus sort of culture or leadership is that we're equals. And this is sort of the point. The point is that we can enter a workspace, obviously knowing that there's tasks, there's rules, there's procedures, there's a CEO, there is hierarchy. We can weave in this sort of Dionysus archetype. And Dionysus, we've talked about before, is the god of wine and pleasure. And when everybody is sort of served, then everyone sort of has this eudemic or contentment about themselves. So I'll post a link to that article on the class website. It's an interesting little article about this guy's book. So very much to kind of see our leadership style as whole. And there is a movement now called whole person leadership. And actually, Jeff Bezos said that saying work-life balance is actually a debilitating term. And a lot of the literature written about this whole person leadership is that it has to do with a mindset of growth at the same time as having self-reflection and introspection. Again, it's the spirit and the matter. Yes, we have competition, we have goals, we've got metrics that we have to kind of abide by. Absolutely. That is the growth. But Bezos and others are saying that this whole person leadership, which is the same model that I'm presenting to you, is that in addition to perhaps the financial or the material or the numbers or the goals that you can check, we have introspection and we have growth as a result, inner growth as a result of that external growth. And that piece has been missing from leadership, from our lives, from work culture for a very long time if it's not incorporated into the culture. My proposition for you, especially if you work in IO, is that this becomes the culture in which you create in the organization so that people understand that spiritual work in whatever industry you're in is possible, so you don't waste these sort of years, but that they understand that every situation, anything that's allowed into the sphere of consciousness is an opportunity for raising consciousness. So that's important to understand. One of the things that's written about a whole life leader says, they need to lead from their authentic inner core to become the leader they desire to be. So this brings me to an extremely, extremely important thing. How do you become the CEO and the COO of your life? You need to have a vision, you need to have a mission, and you need to have core values. This is something that I have clients do, especially when they're struggling in the workplace. And we'll talk about the Heros Gamos and the model of the truth is in the triangle for the corporate world or for your work world, because it's the same principles. So organizations should have a vision statement. And we talked about this a little bit last week. The vision statement should be huge. It should be something so global, sort of all-inclusive. So I think I was telling you the Warby Parker glasses, like affordable eye care for like everybody. Tom's shoes is that everybody has shoes, that nobody is barefoot or has no footwear. So these are very global sort of initiatives. There has to be that sort of vision for your life. In order for you to be an authentic leader in your own life, again, this has nothing to do with leading groups. If you happen to be in a leadership position, perfect, it's going to be applicable. But it's about being the leader, the chairman of the horde of your life, so that you gain your authentic, your inner self is sort of worked through. And as a result, you're serving others too. That's the true contentment and the true balance. So I was actually writing this out the other day. The mission, and I'll share mine with you so you can kind of have an example. Your mission is more linked to, let's say, your material or your business perspective, okay? So maybe your earthly needs, whereas the vision is more of your spiritual needs or your spiritual desires at a very global, high impactful state of being. And the way you're going to get there is through your values. And I've told you this time and time again, top 2 values can't be family. You should define them and put them in measurable terms. So my mission is obviously spiritual education, teaching sort of, these themes, whether it's the psychology, the mythology, the spiritual laws, or working with clients in terms of working through a client's problem and working through spiritual progress. So that's how I'm going to make money. My mission and how I'm going to make money is to be a spiritual counselor or a spiritual educator. Very clear. You pay me for a session, I get paid, I establish my mission. Check. Now my vision is I want to free people from spiritual coercion, whether it's gurus or teachers or churches or cults, because my life led me to this career path via that exact problem, if you will, that wound. So usually when you're doing your vision statement for your life that would then hopefully align with the vision statement of your job. That's the whole purpose of this course, is you have to kind of see what global mission you want in the world. I'm not going to free everybody from coercive techniques. Obviously, it's supposed to be huge. It's supposed to be larger than life. It's supposed to be a purpose-driven identity that you have so that you have the will to keep going and serving others. So this is super, super important that you get very, very clear on your vision and your mission. And then, of course, your values should tie into that. My two top values are spirituality and leadership. So spiritual leadership, which is what I hope to evoke as a result of client connections and student connections, and of course, linked to my vision, which is releasing people of spiritual coercion from cults and religion and teachers and gurus and whatever, so that they can become self-reliant on their own sort of spiritual, sort of inner core values. So it all ties together. This is how an organization that you work for should technically work as well. If you go to the Hieros Gamos, the two interrelating circles, you're going to have your spiritual and your matter. You're going to have the vision and the mission of the organization. But you should connect the two overlapping circles to the thread of why you have that job, to a non-negotiable, and to the unmet need. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So Martin Seligman, and we covered him in positive psychology, came up with an acronym called PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. So here I have it: positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishments. And he says that well-being is established over time with these 5 elements. So if we're looking at eudaimonia or happiness or contentment, what I call this is workplace wellness. So workplace wellness is not a meditation center down the hall or a gym, with a bunch of Peloton machines. Workplace wellness is you showing up as a whole person, working on both your spiritual and your material selves, working on your energy, working on your ordinary and your originality, living out, hopefully, your vision, your mission, and of course, your core values. So he says positive emotion, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment are all part of being or measuring well-being. And if we're looking at from the eudaimonia perspective, that's what he's saying would achieve wellness, that I'm calling the workplace wellness. So I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's friends with, are you guys familiar with Bill Parcells, the famous NFL coach? Well, this guy, they call him the Big Tuna. I don't remember what team, maybe Dallas, but he was like a big guy in the NFL. Anyway, they used to call him the Big Tuna. And when he was coaching football, they would have players that would play, and they would call some of the players JAGs, J-A-G. Any idea what that stands for? It stands for just another guy. So basically, that was a player that didn't really have any maybe superior, outstanding qualities. And so I'm talking to this friend, and he's friends with Bill Parcells, and the guy he says to me, Francis, I don't want to be a JAG. I don't want to be just another guy. And I said, oh, so you're struggling with your CEO-ness. I'm like, you're ordinary. You're struggling with just your ordinary. And the part that we have to kind of figure out is, where's your originality? With what you do in your field, what makes you original? And later I'm going to give you the 5 C's to the diamond, at work. And that's one of them, is what is it that you bring to the table that only you can bring? So years ago, I created an assignment for clients, and it's in my book, Witch Bitch. And I really highly recommend that you do this assignment first for yourself, and really for clients. It's a supremely good assignment. So it's called Stone Soup, and it's linked to identify your vision and your mission. So a lot of this class, I told you, is Virgo in the 6th house and illness, and we'll talk a little bit about illness. And today I'm saying workplace wellness and how to show up whole and serve others and serve self and so forth. But we all have a wound. So from 0 to 7, when our snow globe shatters and in our childhood something happens, that wound becomes sort of like our identity that is woven through every story that we tell. And Carolyn Mace calls it woundology. She says that people immediately within minutes of talking will talk about their abuse or talk about harassment or whatever their wound is. I listen archetypally. It's not always that obvious, as some wounds are very subtle, or to us may appear subtle, or some people don't want to necessarily show their wound, but it is woven in what they speak. So this guy that was telling me about the Jag, obviously his wound was that he was just one of the crowd. He didn't really stand out. And I know in his particular life, part of his wound is being so short. So I told you that when we go to grade school, usually when we leave home, we become the class clown, we become the perfectionist, the know-it-all, the teacher's helper, because we're trying to have an identity. It's part of the ego and the personality around that 7-year, age, when now the conscious mind has developed, the personality and the ego are and we're developing this personality. This is very much linked to our wound. So Stone Soup is a child's book. You're familiar with it? I love that book, okay? So for those of you who may not know, this foreigner comes off the street and he puts this big pot, like a cauldron, in the middle of the town center. And he puts a stone in it and he's boiling. The whole city is going, or the whole town is going hungry. So somebody comes by and says, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm making stone soup." And one of the townspeople say, "Oh, I have carrots." He's like, "Oh, bring it." The other townsperson, "I have celery." And the other person, "I have a potato." And all of a sudden, all the resources of everybody combined makes a soup. The stone was obviously a placeholder. And that's us. We are an ingredient, a very, very supremely important ingredient. This is our originality that only we can bring. Everybody had a vegetable. So that's maybe the JAG, the just an ordinary guy. Maybe your vegetable is just one, but it's you and the way you bring that to the workforce, to your family, to your team that makes you so special. And it's only the originality that you can bring. So at the end, everybody was nourished, everybody was fed. And that's a very important thing about workplace wellness. Are you being fed and are you feeding others? And I will talk a little bit about a leadership style that I encountered that I actually disagree with, and I'll tell you my version of it. But that concept of stone soup. So the assignment that I have people do, and when I did this, it was so clear. So from all your memories or all your stories, and they could be the big sort of broad strokes of your life, write down on a piece of paper keywords. Then put them in a circle, kind of like a soup, and take a picture. And now you have your stone soup. That circle tells you your wound. That circle shows you the thread woven through. So I started doing, it's kind of like your life's resume. So if you start seeing sexual assault or harassment or poverty, or in my case, spiritual coercion, I started seeing this in every single thing of my life. Obviously, that led me to my vision. If spiritual coercion was the theme that I saw repeated, and I can't even tell you how many times that showed up in my life. I let it enter my sphere of consciousness. I cannot ignore that to think that that is not my purpose or my vision. That would be ignorant. So when I do this assignment with clients, they're like, "Oh my God, this is the thread." And one of the ones I write about in my book, in the 7 Gates, is this client that I had who kept dating women that had either been sexually abused or sexually assaulted, or she had friends that had been raped or sexually assaulted. And she identified her vision to be, again, larger than life, was linked to some purpose, some vision or mission of helping people, specifically women of a certain age group, with either sexual harassment or sexual assault. So our thread, our purpose, our vision is directly related to our wound. And instead of getting sick, we can have quote unquote workplace wellness when we actually engage and find meaning in these threads rather than separating them as that they serve no purpose or they keep us different or ill. So that's a really important thing. So in shamanism, there's something we do in shamanism, which is called a soul loss. And the antidote, so to speak, is a soul retrieval. A soul loss is when something really bad happens to you. And again, everybody's wound is the wound that they have, that they need, that they signed up for. I'm no one to judge on a scale of 1 to 10. We don't compare wounds. We don't compare pain. That's nonsense. Ever do you do that to a client? You will invalidate what they feel and what they've experienced. So, and parents do this a lot with their children. Oh, you don't really feel that way. Or Tommy has it worse. So obviously we never do that. We engage with the client at whatever, point their wound has entered them. So in shamanism, when you have a wound that has impacted you, you can have actually a soul loss where a fragment of your soul breaks off. And then in a shamanic energy healing, that's called a soul retrieval, we actually bring back those fragmented pieces of yourself. And a lot of times after a soul retrieval, clients will say that they actually feel whole. They feel more complete than ever. This is a big part of understanding the stone soup, that the wound, that the thread that you're viewing as negative or ill or keeps you different or abandoned or unlovable is actually the vision and the purpose of your life. When you can see it from a global perspective, then you can get down to the mission. Well, how do I make money doing that? There's this Japanese concept called ikigai, where it talks about what's my vocation, what's my passion, how do I make money, how do I serve doing it? And it's the same idea. It's the same idea of my stone soup. So I was reading a bit about this idea of service leadership, and I'm not against service leadership, obviously, but one of the things that I have a problem, and I don't think that this contributes to workplace wellness, personally, internally, external and internally, I think it actually links to burnout, which I talked to you about last week, is the idea of service over self. I don't agree with that. That's something that's a lot in the literature. I believe in service and self. And there's this old proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. That's very different. So I have this client, and I said this to him. I said, based on his energy and his chart and stuff, I'm like, you're willing to go to any lengths to get on top. Like, he has very, very high goals and will basically, step on anyone to get on top. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. I'm very competitive. I want to be high in my field and so forth. And I said, okay, that's great. However, kings need counsel. And this glyph of Venus is teamwork. It's actually the sign of Libra. And Libra it's not the most balanced sign, but it's the sign of balance. It's the sign of 48 to 52. It's the sign of teamwork. If you want to get to the top and you don't have a team of counsel, of archetypes, of people, not even necessarily that they're helping you. You want to say you're doing it alone? Have at that if that's your attitude. But don't be silly and not maximize the people in your sphere of consciousness and what they're mirroring for you about what you need to do and change. So I love this. Let me reread it. If you want to go fast, go alone. That's the Mars archetype. That's the competition archetype. But if you want to go far, go together. Big, big difference. So one of the things I see a lot with people is this idea of competition and competition and competition. There's a medal, there's a goal, there's something to achieve. Remember, I work in the spirit realm and people that want to do inner work. Inner work is play. Inner work is Venus. Inner work is not Mars. The Mars archetype is the competition. Play is with other kids in the sandbox. Many, many years ago, when I was in the cult, before it kind of went awry, if you will, the cult leader said to all of us, all the kids, go to Toys R Us and pick out one toy. And when I went to Toys R Us, I bought a sandbox. And that was something that stood out to me that she had pointed out. I mean, I was a young girl. I don't think I was older than 11 or 12 when this happened. And she's like, Frances is the only one that bought a toy that's for the whole community. Everybody else bought like a truck or a doll, but I bought a sandbox. And so my attitude is that I'm very much a competitive person, and I have goals, and I know where I'm headed. But I know I have no inkling to believe that I can get anywhere without a team, and that everything that enters my consciousness is for me to learn from. Of course, like I told you the other day, the discernment of understanding that not everything can I apply, but I don't miss an opportunity. And so even if you're not going to create a team, so to speak, because you want to do it yourself, use the team, use the counsel that you've allowed into your consciousness to get where you want to go, because nobody can do this alone. So I was telling this client the other day, I'm like, and related to the idea of a spiritual business, if your spiritual work has become competition, it's not spiritual work. If your dharma has become competitive, it's no longer a dharma. I was talking to a client yesterday, and she was sort of like being competitive with her mothering. So between her and her ex-husband. And I said, you know, your dharma gets lost in that competition. So this idea of dharma being your duty, your spiritual duty, so to speak, at whatever stage of life you are, and hers at that moment is mothering. If you're trying to compete with the other partner, whether you're married or divorced, in her case, that dharma, that duty, that presence, that mindfulness of parenting, if it's competition to be the best mom, it's lost all of the dharma associated with it. So the moment you attach competition and goal, that's it. It became material. So I was asking a client the other day, how much of your life, and this was the person that I mentioned that was in the spiritual industry, how much of your life is spirit and how much is dedicated to matter? And he's like, well, this whole work. And I said, no, just because you're in a spiritual business, spiritual industry doesn't mean it's spiritual. How much of that work do you now go home, internalize, apply, use the universal laws, do a TED talk, show up as an STD, do a striptease, really get down to the core of who you are, give back as a result? He's like, oh. So when there's competition or metrics attached, it becomes competitive. The dharma, or the spiritual nature of it, is gone. The only exception to this rule is defining in measurable terms and measurable objectives your value system. You cannot be spiritual and not use an experience that enters your consciousness if you do not have a value system to go check it against. So somebody says to me the other day, and they were feeling guilty. They said, I walked by a homeless person and I didn't give anything. And that makes me feel very bad. I'm like, I disagree. If you don't have a value system around how you're going to help others, let's just say in this case, this homeless person who he was saying was on drugs or whatnot, you can't help, because then you'll self-betray. So with that opportunity, when he opened his consciousness sphere and allowed it in, was saying, go to the drawing board and write a philosophy of life, write a rule around how you're going to help people in need on the street if they're drunk or if they're drugged or if they're homeless. So it's not to say that you can't open your window and give the dollar, but if that opens in your life, if you opened your sphere of consciousness to have that enter, if you don't go home and write a rule around that, a value system around that, 0, 100, and a 48 to 52 about when you'll donate, when you don't donate, then you're not managing your energy and you're not enlightened. There goes your CEO out the window. Just because it enters your space, don't be quick to conventional morality of what you should do. Question. Ask yourself, what is my belief about this? COVID shifted the entire service industry in terms of tipping and waiters and waitresses and things like that. And that has come up a lot in my sphere of consciousness lately. So this weekend, one of the things that I wrote in my rule book was sort of my new way of how I was going to show up at restaurants to servers, good service, bad service, how much tipping, takeout, pickup. That's spiritual. You wouldn't think that activity is spiritual. Why? Because it's of a material nature, because it has to do with money and food. The fact that you're writing your value system and having a rule book, that's your mission in life. How do you know how you're going to show up when you have lunches at work? If you're going to split the bill, if you're going to take a colleague's bill on, even if you are a CEO of the company, what you're going to expense or not expense. Everything is spiritual when you go home to the drawing board and write values around it. It has nothing to do with the packaging that it's in. If it's entered your consciousness, don't miss that opportunity. So I'm not about this service instead of self-leadership. I say service and self. It serves you, it serves the other. The spirit and the matter. This is where I say the chairman of the horde. It's about you. It's always about you. Make it about you. Identify what you're learning in this space. When you make it about you and you sort of internalize that and you grow and you change, then and only then can you, from a fourth chakra perspective, give to the other. So that was what I thought was very ironic in Van Gogh's suicide. He tried shooting himself in the heart, fourth chakra, but he got to the stomach. The third chakra is the stomach. It's still low level consciousness. It's still in the animal nature because it's the third chakra, the lower three chakras. It's a center of self-worth. Maybe at that point he was in a 48 to 52 of ordinary and original and said, I don't want to be ordinary and let me go. But he didn't make it to that heart space. And it was really interesting because one of his quotes that I really loved was, loving another, I'm sure it wasn't this exact wording, loving another is the best form of art. And I thought that was just so lovely. And I think that's really what he left as a legacy and what he wanted to do, you know, absolutely. But it was interesting that in his suicide attempt, it went to the third chakra and not to the fourth. And I think that that's what he probably achieved, was a level of individuation of the Uranus-Saturn archetypes. So that's where it begins. Then we can start. So we really do literally have to become the chairman of the hordes. So I've been reading a lot about transparent leadership. And transparent leadership is an attempt at leadership style where you let your employees be honest, very open and honest. Yet most people don't feel that they can do that. They don't feel that there's authenticity in leadership. And so in your own life, as being obviously the CEO and the COO of your own life, authenticity is important. When you're authentic, you make someone feel safe. We all have a safety need. It's the first need, safety and security. Nobody felt safe. So when you're authentic, when you're that sort of leader, when you're transparent, you're actually allowing people to feel safe and feel that they can trust you and that they can be open with you because you're being open with them. So I'm very obviously honest with my clients. So when they struggle with a thought, here's my narcissistic cookie dough, warts and all. When they struggle with a thought about gluttony or vanity or impure thoughts or narcissism, I'm right there with them. I'm like authentic and open and honest about my own struggles with these thoughts and how I manage to sort of let them go. So I no longer have to hold them as if, it's something horrible, but I could rather just let it go. So I say to clients, be on the board of deflectors. Everyone is afraid of being a naysayer, of saying no, I want positive vibes, I want to be optimistic. And yes, the first thing for Martin Seligman, well-being is positive emotion. Positive emotion does not mean only living in the light, does not mean only being positive, does not mean never saying no. So I say, be a no-sayer, be on the board of deflectors. Don't just say yes, yes, yes to everything. When you say no gracefully, that doesn't fit in my schedule, I don't have time for that, I'm already invited on many projects. Honestly, I've overbooked myself this week. Whatever that is, you're giving the other permission. That's workplace wellness. That's saying, I know how to manage my energy, my time, and my resources. That's the energetic component of the CEO, and that's material. You only have a certain amount of money, you only have a certain amount of time, and you only have a certain amount of resources or energy. And if you don't know how to navigate your energy correctly, you're going to feel like your boundaries have been violated and that you've sort of felt limited or you don't feel healthy, and that can lead you to sickness. So be a no-sayer and be on the board of deflectors. There is no reason why you have to say all the time, yes, 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 to everything that you're invited on. Just like if something comes into your sphere of consciousness, an email or a directive from your boss, you have a right to ask. Go back to your values. Is this the shared value system in your job? So it's you and your employer. Same Harrow's Gamos model as the truth is in the triangle. What is the thread? The thread may be a paycheck. I was talking to someone who said, my thread here, because I asked her, she's like, I was retired and I was bored. So I want to have some social interaction. I like the students and I want to be out of my house. So the thread for her is not financial. For me, partly it's financial, but partly for me is professional development. When I get to teach and think out of box and create lectures, it serves me academically too and intellectually. So what's the thread between you and your business, between you and your place of employment? You need to know why you're there. And it's fine if it's material and it's just a paycheck, not a problem. The thread serves to always goes back to your values. If that thread in your value system don't line up, you're going to self-betray. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to get sick, burnout, or stress. The next is the non-negotiable. This is about being a no-sayer. What are they asking you to do? Did someone ask you to change a grade? Did somebody ask you to sign a paper that you're not supposed to sign because it's post-dated or predated, whatever the word is, and that's illegal? What is your limit to what you will do for that paycheck, for that thread? So years ago, I worked at National Institutes of Health, and I learned, and I was never this type of person, ever. Like, I've always really been about hyper clarity and hyper honesty to a fault. Like, I have to relax a bit because it went overboard. But I learned that there is a technique where they can actually lift up the signature and the date that you sign a paper. And they did that. The National Institutes of Health, the study that I worked for, was being accused, this particular satellite office, of forging and changing the dates. They had a specialist come in and do whatever this technique is to lift up the date. Well, I had never signed anything, and I was sort of just in the dietetics area. I didn't do anything with the administration. But I learned that. And that to me became such a value system. Like, I don't sign anything if it's not the date that it is. And I have been at jobs where they have said, change the date, and I'll be like, nope. I mean, this is so part of my value system, the clarity and the honesty, and knowing that piece of information. Talk about a stone soup. If something enters your sphere of consciousness, do not minimize it. You are going to need that information later. Put it somewhere in your values. Put it somewhere in your life, because it did not enter accidentally. I can guarantee you. And that is just something that I live by. If someone asks me to sign, I'll be like, nope, I don't sign a wrong date. And I have signed papers for accreditation visits, and I will not put the date. Like, that is just something that I am so hardcore about. So that's a quote unquote silly one. But what perhaps does your job ask you to do that is so against your value system? You have to be a no-sayer. And if it means you have to leave, you have to leave. That's a whole other conversation, because we obviously have to meet our material needs, and if we need a job and so forth, that's not what this is about. But absolutely question, what is your non-negotiable? I remember years ago reading for a client who was an accountant, and I said, whatever you do not bend the books. And he looked at me and I said, you're gonna have opportunities to cook the books. Do not ever do that. You will go to jail. And Enron was around that time. And so this was very like in the atmosphere. And I remember that session vividly. It was like, do not do that. That must be a non-negotiable. In your career, in your field, there are things that are absolute non-negotiables. In counseling, you do not sleep with a client. There is a rule that you wait 2 years before you date a client from termination date. So you need to know your scope of practice. You need to know the rules. And if you're in a field where someone is asking you to violate a non-negotiable, you have to know your value system real clear to know why you're there and what you're doing and what that opportunity is showing up in your life for you to show up for yourself. If you don't know your value system, you will do some crazy stuff just in the name of a paycheck. So this is important. This is just important for what Aristotle was talking about, the highest good. Not only the good of society, but good of yourself, but the good of society. Because the quality and the character and the integrity of the people in society make up the society. That's why there's rules. That's why Hammurabi wrote the Hammurabi Code. We need rules of ethics and codes to live by. You need to have a rule book. So this is an extremely important part. No one has ever asked me to change a grade, but that's a big thing in academics. Change a grade for a student? Oh, hell no would I ever change a grade for a student. Like, you have to know sort of those gray areas that people might, and know what your value system is about that. Super important. And then of course, you have a job because you have an unmet need. To think that you're at a certain job haphazardly, like I told you last week, you really think you picked your profession? Obviously it's meeting a need. In my case, that I counseled my mom, so here I counsel people. Talking, I was never listened to as a child. Of course there's a validation need. And acknowledging that only part of your job is to meet that one need. It's intertwined, it's part of that. So if the job is not violating the thread, not violating the non-negotiable, and not violating the unmet need, there's no reason to leave. It becomes very clear. The model holds the space. It doesn't mean that you can't change, but understand that everything you need is in that place. Of course, you can change your career path. There's reasons why materially people change. I'm speaking spiritually. So you definitely want to be a no-sayer. The word no is a very powerful word. There's an activity that I used to do with clients, especially clients that have difficulty with boundaries. I would tell them to take out a piece of paper and put a no and put it on their belly. So you could take out a piece of paper, put no, and put it on your belly, but facing outward, so that the blank part of the paper is touching your belly button. Why would I have a client put a piece of paper taped to their belly button that says no underneath their shirt? So that when someone asked them something, they could say no. It was already there. Energetically at their third chakra, they could say no, they could have a boundary. Years ago, I used to teach at this school, and I used to teach that freshman experience class, student study skills and stuff. And one of the activities, this is how old I am, like when cell phones just started, and people would be on their phone a lot. And I would tell the students that back then there was this T-Mobile commercial that was like your circle of friends, like there were 5 people in your circle of friends. I'm so old, dating myself back to that commercial. But basically, I don't know if you got like 5 free friends that could call back in the day when you used to have to pay minutes and stuff like that. And I would tell them to take out a piece of paper and make 5 circles, themselves in the middle, their T-Mobile circle of friends, and put me, or you, themselves that while they were at school, those 4 hours of class, that's it. They were not allowed to pick up their phone. They were not allowed, under any circumstances, they were there for themselves. The only extenuating circumstance, God forbid, your kid is sick or some emergency. But if anybody of your quote unquote circle of friends, your friends were calling you during class, what are they telling you? They don't respect you. They're violating your boundaries. They're basically saying, I don't care that you pay this much for education. Your school time doesn't matter to me. And we tested that out every month, every semester. I would give this assignment. And I'm like, you are your T-Mobile circle of friends these 4 hours a day when you're in class. We don't do that. We don't set that boundary. The other thing is I would have them write a piece of paper, no. And if somebody texted them during class, I would have them take a picture of the no and send the picture. No, unless their kid was dying and it was something severely or tragic, I would say, text them the picture, no. So they started getting comfortable with this idea of no. No is a very powerful word, and you need to understand that if you want to be a CEO, because you don't have unlimited amounts of energy, people. For our money, somehow, we do that. For our money, we're more likely to say no. But for our time and our resources, we are like weak in saying no. And so I say, be a no-sayer. Be on the board of deflectors and go, nope, can't. This is your life. This is your time, your money, your resources. Value that. Nobody else is going to value it, surely if you don't value it. And I've told you before, start a session on time. Be respectful of that person's time. I have this one client, I'll call her on the dot, and she's always like, oh, Francis, you're always on time. You're always on the dot. I'm like, yes, because that's my way of showing I respect you and your time and me and my time. And as that, I end right on time. Sometimes I'll stop the recording and I'll say to the client, okay, let me tell you the next steps. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to send you resources. I'm going to do this. If it's a brand new client, this is how you're going to get the recording, the workbook, whatever, I'm sending them. And I'll budget a minute or two to spend that extra time with them to explain, because they're a new client. But I budgeted that for the next minute that I have the next client, so I'm not late, running late. Doesn't mean that you never run late. Of course, there are times. But if you learn to budget your time, your energy, and your resources, that is the language of self-worth. And we are not no-sayers. We're afraid to say no. So that activity of the no on your belly button, when you feel that paper taped to your stomach and someone asks you something, it's almost like this shield. It's like, oh, I have a right. We have to do these tricks sometimes with clients. In shamanism, I mentioned we do something called a soul retrieval. One of the very common things, and Claude Poncelet, he was actually a physicist and a shaman. He would talk about power loss. And he says that power loss was a shamanic illness. Everything in shamanism is about illness, energetic illness. So we immediately understand, and that's mindset too. Yes, it goes to the earthly world eventually where you have physical symptoms, but it all started in the energy field. It all started from your energy body. So what he talks about is this idea of power loss. And power loss, your energetic currency, is material. It is a material currency. Even though it might seem spiritual because it's energy, it's actually matter. And when you lose your power, it's usually because your boundaries were violated, meaning you weren't a no-sayer and you didn't know how to say no, or someone violated your boundaries, God forbid they raped you or stole something from you, and you lose your power that way. The other is when you sacrifice your own integrity to get your needs met. So if your unmet need of validation is more than your non-negotiable, you are in a major self-betrayal and a major power loss. My boss comes to me and asks me to change a grade, and me needing the paycheck or getting validated is more important than the integrity around my value system. That's when problems occur. And we do this all the time. We do this in relationships, we do this in jobs, we do this in our families. That's why I say consider the crime, not the criminal. This also happens, Poncelet says, when we internalize limiting beliefs And this is obviously one of the things that we need counsel for when we don't like someone or we judge someone, is so we can identify our own limiting beliefs. The other way that we lose our energy is through a soul loss. I mentioned that oftentimes through trauma, we have a piece of our soul that is lost. And the third way that we lose our power, or we get sick and we have no workplace wellness or inner health, is by something called entanglement. This is when we take energy that is not our own. You will take someone else's energy. This is what I call feed and fly. If you are inhibiting or prohibiting someone from learning something or fending for themselves or learning a skill, or you're paying something for someone, or you're doing their homework for them, whatever it is, you are entangled with their energy. You're not letting them do their 50%, be the king of their life. And you can be counsel, but they have to be king on their throne. And if someone is taking energy from you, we call that power loss and violating boundaries. It's another form of entanglement or enmeshment. We do this with people, and we do this at jobs. One of the ways that we do this in our job is working more and longer hours. I'm not saying that there aren't times in academics we have accreditation visits. When the accreditation visits every 5 years, of course you're going to work late. Of course you're going to stay. That's something known in academics that you're going to do. But if just gratuitously, day in and day out, you're staying 3 and 4 and 5 hours longer, and you're a workaholic in the guise, you're stealing that energy from other areas of your life, from yourself. You're entangled with that job. So it can be an inanimate sort of thing that you're entangled with, and that steals your power. There's no health in that. I don't care how fat your paycheck is. So when we're writing our sort of mission, and I put mission-driven versus purpose-driven. These are two very, very distinct, let me just check the time, two very, very distinct styles of a company. If you're going to be a mission-driven company, you're going to have a mission to make X number of dollars selling X number of coffee mugs. If you're a purpose-driven company, you're going to have a bigger vision, something that is socially, helping society, the community, the world. It's going to be more socially conscious. Nowadays, a lot of the newer generation, the millennials and the Gen Zs, want purpose-driven companies. So again, because this is about ourselves and being the CEO and COO of our own life, we have to be both. We have to be both mission-driven and purpose-driven. The mission-driven is the earthly world. We need a paycheck. You want a title, you want to be validated, you want the corner office, you want the nice car, and the expense account. Great, not a problem with that. But how do you use the mission of your organization, how do you use the mission of the job, the mission of the people that you work with, to make your life purpose-driven? When I showed you the astrology wheel, I told you, you don't hire. You have the individual, you have the personal, which is where the work sector is here, and then you have the universal sector. You cannot eliminate the individual, the unmet needs, the validation needs, the need for money, what they value, all of that from the person. Just like you can't change their color eyes, their brown hair or blue eyes, you can't change that, right? So you have to accept the individual as they are and know that that's what you're hiring. In the job, you're working from a personal sphere. Yes, you're getting work, but of course, it's your counsel. And then if you're satisfied, not only materially or mission-driven, that you got your paycheck, you did your service, you met friends, all of the things that this sector of the chart mean, then you're going to give back universally. Then you're going to go back, fourth chakra, the wellness, to give to the other. That's the true eudaimonia. That's the true contentment, the true happiness, the true high value individual that we put out into the world that makes the society and the world a better place. But your life has to have both. your job and the way you sort of approach your life and your work has to be both mission driven, so your values, kind of what you want to work in, but purpose driven is directly linked to the value system that you're trying to incorporate in your life. So you have to have both of those, and your visions are very, very clear. There's something that is pretty common now. Before, people used to stay in a job 20, 30 years, retire, get a pension. We don't see that. Now the research shows that people stay about 5 years in a job. Makes sense. That's a Saturn cycle, 5 to 7 years of skinny cows. And then they get bored. They either go back to school or they find a different industry or something like that. So these are serial job hoppers. And what happens is a lot of them are non-committal because they don't know their value system. So they don't really know why they're hopping job to job. And it's kind of like how in relationships, you're attracting the same person with a different face. You might be in the same job over and over again with a different name or a different location, but really it's linked for the inability or the ineffectiveness of having a value system in your life. And the two questions that I have clients ask, because I check in with the material world, even though we're doing spiritual work, like, does your resources, does your schedule, do the tolls, like, do these material consequences keep you from seeking something different or making you stay in your current job? So 2 questions I have clients answer is, how is the job contributing to the vision that they have for their life? How does your job contribute to your vision, your larger, huge vision? In my case, spiritual coercion, helping people to not be bound by spiritual coercive techniques. The second is, how is the job contributing to the vision I have for my life? So you've got sort of the global vision and then the vision of your life. And are these linked back to that thread, to that non-negotiable, to those unmet needs? These are important questions to have clients answer, and of course yourselves answer. So I want to teach you, I'm not gonna be able to finish everything. I'll pick up on Thursday, but I want to end with the Enneagram. So I taught you this symbol before. This is the Enneagram. There is an entire Enneagram personality. I do not use that. That is not what this is about. Gurdjieff, the philosopher, the Armenian philosopher, sort of resuscitated, if you will, the Enneagram. And there are 9 points on the Enneagram. And any single thing you put into your life has a life cycle of the Enneagram. So there's 9 points. It's rooted in numerology, which was Pythagoras' sort of everything can be boiled down to the numbers 1 to 9. And Tesla even says that everything can be boiled down to 3, 6, and 9. And if you know the 3, 6, and 9, you know sort of the answers to the universe. So I've told you before, the language of the universe is math, metaphysics, and music. And this is a musical sort of law, the law of octaves, and it's metaphysical, obviously. And it's also mathematical. I am not a mathematician, but I know that Tesla made that commentary specifically linked to the 3, 6, 9. And if you look at the 3, 6, 9, it's the triangle. And you guys all know my theories around the triangle. So if you just look at the 3, 6, 9, you've got a thought, you do your TED Talk. 6 is linked again to the 6th house of service and work and actionable items, so to speak. And then the 9 is the ending and letting go. If we look at astrology, the 3rd house is thought, the 6th is service, work, health, illness, all the things we're talking about this month. And the 9 is wisdom. In my model, it's the truth of wisdom. So we're beyond the intellect, we're beyond the thought, but now we're sort of using the intuition. So there's many ways to do this. But what I want to use in this model is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if you put in your work job, and I'm going to teach you how to do it based on your job. And I did it last night. So I've been part of the Kaiser system in some capacity or another for 18 years. When I was the dean, I did it, and I was in a number 8, which is a power role. When I was the dean of nursing, I was hired to basically break down the team and rebuild it. That's a 4. I was in a construction role. Now I'm in a service role, in a 6. So I'm going to teach you how to calculate your role in that job. But first, kind of let me break down the business cycle so that you know. So this is something that I use a lot. If I'm going to do consulting work, or if I'm going to do any sort of thing with a business, I always either Google or ask the owner during our talk when they started. When a company starts is a number 1. There is an actual cycle to every business, as there is a cycle to you working in that place. So if you work, think of how many years you've been there. Year 1, when the cycle starts, it's a new start. So it's a new beginning, it's the birth, it's the origin story. I always ask somebody how the company started, on what idea it started. That will tell you everything. That's the origin story. Okay. The second year has to do with harmony and conflict, relationships. There can be a partnership, it could break up, or someone can bring in a partner in a year 2. In a third year, there can be a new thought, a new idea. It's sort of like when Steve Jobs goes and brings in the idea of the iPod. It's a whole new idea that birthed at that moment. Year 4 of an organization, now this is the organizational cycle, but I'm going to bring it into you and your job. So if you know the year that your job started, you'll see that it's very cool. There's always conflict and there's always construction. This is a really good time for a rebrand. So I'm in a year 4 numerologically, just in my personal life, and I'm doing a whole rebrand. You would say, oh, it's accidental. It's not. And I hadn't even figured that out until I was like in the process. I'm like, oh my God, I'm in a total rebrand year. I'm in a 4. So if you're consulting for a company, or if you notice and you can do the numerology or the Enneagram on the cycle of that business, that's the time where you want to have a rebrand, is during a year 4. A year 5 is about growth and fun. This would be the time to like bring in a perk or create a softball team for the team, or if they want to add a second location. In a 5 year, that's a growth year. 6 year is a service year. This is going to be more service oriented if they want to maybe donate to the local softball team, or do a 5K as a team, or do something more in the community, be more of service. It would be a 6 year. A 7 year is like a spiritual year or an introspective year. Many years ago, I heard Oprah interviewing, at the time, the CEO of Starbucks. And he said that they were going, I guess they were having like a crisis. And I think she used the words like spiritual crisis. It was a 7 year. Now, mind you, Starbucks, I don't know how many years it's been around, but even if something's around 70, 80, 90 year, it follows the same pattern. This is something that you can use in your own life too. And I taught you this, but some of you are new, many, many years back, where you can put anything into this. The year you buy your house is 1, and you'll know that every 4 years there's going to be a plumbing issue or something. It's going to follow that pattern. There's a thread that follows everything based on this model. It's awesome. The 8 year is a power year or a money year. So this would be a year to give raises. This would be a year to maybe make improvements to the building and put money. Maybe this is a big marketing year, because it's a year that you put money out and you get more power, maybe in terms of the community or in your industry. And the 9 year is an endings year. That's a year that if you have to let people go, or you need to close a department, or an academics teach out a program, it would be in a 9 year. And all businesses follow this cycle. I was on a podcast a couple months ago, and that's the first question that the woman asked me. She's like, what's the sort of spiritual cycle of a business? And I explained this model to her. Now, the same thing happens not only for that company. So this is great if you're in your personal business. Obviously, if you have your own organization, obviously you can use this for your life, being the CEO and the COO of your own life. But if you want to know your role in your job, find out the year your organization started. So I looked it up last night. I think Kaiser started in 1977. Did I put it? Yeah. Kaiser started in 1977 and I started here in 2018. So it's 42 years is a 6-year. So from the year you start, you subtract from the year the company started. However many years, even if the company's in existence 350 years, 3 plus 5 is 8. That means that you're in an 8-year. Your role in that organization is to be of power and make money. So I'm in a 6 role here, and I know 6 is of service. So that helps me understand my mindset. I was also sick. I had cancer most of the time I worked here this time. 6 is linked to illness. So part of my time at this particular job during this Kaiser stint is of those themes of a 6-year, which is service, which is illness, which is work, which is wellness. I started a wellness center on campus. So you start seeing your role. So the way you do it is, in my case, Kaiser started 1977. That's 42 years. I started in 2018. The first year is always the number 1. So 1977, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, exactly like that. And you can actually map from 77, every single, so look, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86. In 1986, something at Kaiser University had to start new. Maybe they changed the name, maybe they started a new program, maybe they went to a new location. And you can track the cycle of the whole thing. I know that I'm a 6-year. So I can go to the year, let's say 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, find out what happened in 1982, because I am ushering in the same energy that Kaiser University did in 1982. And I can go ask Dr. Kaiser or someone who's been here that long, say, hey, what happened at Kaiser University in 1982? They started something, some new technology. Well, we just opened a big esports thing. And you start seeing the threads and the parallels. And it also teaches you, in my case, this becomes 42. 4 plus 2 is 6. I'm in a 6 as a role at Kaiser. One of the things I've noticed, because you can't subtract 2018 from 77, that'll give you 41. Because the thing of numerology that the first year has to be 1. So what I've calculated is you can subtract them and then add a 1, and that'll give you the accurate answer. So if you don't know your job's origin, you could Google it, or you can ask your boss when they started, the year, and the year you started, subtract it and add a 1 so you don't miss that first year, and then go, in my case, 4 plus 2 is 6. That's my role. So your role is, if you start in the first year, it's leadership. And when I did my numerology for, I think it was the first dean job, it was a 1, which I was the new, we had the new building, a new VP, and I was the first dean. So there was new, and it was a leadership role. If you're in a 2, you're there to build relationships. One of your roles at the organization is to specifically build relationships. If you're there in a 3 role, you're there to build ideas or bring new ideas. In a 4 role, you're there for construction or solving conflict resolution. Like I was hired when I went to the dean of nursing, there was so much conflict on campus. I literally had to break down the team and rebuild. It was literally a construction year, and it was a 4 role for me. A 5-year is about growth and fun. Maybe you're hired as the party planner, Mary, like student services. She makes a lot of the organizations and all of the things on campus that the students enjoy. So it could be a 5 role. A 6 role, I told you, is service, maybe to the community. In my case, I was illness, but I also made a workplace wellness facility. 7 is an introspection. Maybe you come to give maybe subtle guidance or just to do your own introspective work. Maybe that's just your role there, is to be basically getting counsel from everyone around you. I mean, that's always, but maybe that's specifically reason that you're at that job for that particular moment. An 8-year is power and money. Everyone always wants that year. And then in 9 years, endings. Maybe you're there to help see something out. Maybe you're there to get fired because you have to learn something about an ending. Maybe you're there to learn something on how to end a project and then move on to a different facility or a different part. That happened to me. One of the jobs ended, they offered me the extension of the new job. And I said, no, my time here is done. And then, you know, my boss called me back a little while later and offered me a different project. So sometimes you're just there for a stint. So this helps you, the Enneagram helps you identify the role of you in that job so that you know and you can go with that attitude. Does that link up to your thread, to your non-negotiables, to your values, to your unmet needs? You ask that. But if you know your role, you're going to go in with a different mindset. Then maybe if you're not in an 8 year, it's not about power and money. This is also a tool that you can help you find a job. You could do the numerology. I did this in one of my other jobs. I did the numerology and I discovered when they opened. I, of course, looked up the chart to find out what sign they were and stuff like that and how it fit in with my birth chart. But you can also see, do I want to be a 3 role in that place? Do I want to have a 7 role in that place? Maybe that's not what you want in your life at that particular time. And if you have several job offers, you can determine based on the role of being in that space. And if it's your own personal business, so I have this job, but I also have my personal business. I track from 2009, 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I'm in a 7 year. My business, my personal spiritual counseling business is in a 7 year. And I'm in a total introspective year in terms of, like I said, I'm doing a rebranding. I'm figuring out my message. I have to identify, you know, the bigger message, my tagline, my trademark, things like that. Those are very internal processes that I'm figuring out. When I come out next year in 2022, when I sort of release my thing, all my new books, my new rebranding site, which is a power year, it's all a reflection of everything I did internally this year. So you can track your own business with this, and it'll always tell you exactly where you are in the process. Any questions on that? So I want to talk to you about one last thing linked to the Enneagram, and then we'll end, because I won't have time to start the next idea. So I don't use the Enneagram as a personality tool. A lot of people in our field do. They really like it. It speaks to like the reformer, or the achiever, the perfectionist, or the helper. It's a personality profile tool, kind of like the Myers-Briggs. I don't personally use it that way. I use it for this from a metaphysical perspective, but you can. And if you Google the Wikipedia page of the Enneagram, it's very interesting. It's got some really good stuff. And I have some Enneagram books, but I think they're at home. So if you're into that, you could take this a step further. But the last thing I want to give you is sort of the opportunity to learn at work, depending on what role you are. So if you're in a 1 role at work, one of the things that might develop that you can work through energetically is resentment. So the 1 is linked to resentment and anger. So if you show up as a leader, if it's a leadership role, it's a year 1, you might develop resentment of anger if things aren't implemented the way you want to. And so one of the things associated with that is, I'll just write this here, is resentment and anger. So each of these roles have a vice or a quote unquote negative shadow aspect that you can work on. The second has to do with flattery and pride. So if you're a 2 role, it could be flattery and pride. It could be aspects of self that you can work on. If you're a 3, it could be vanity and deceit. This makes a lot of sense because leaders, obviously, if something isn't implemented, they can have anger. If harmony in relationships is your sort of role. Well, flattery, of course. What is that saying? Flattery. What's that saying about flattery? You can get far with flattery, something like that. There's like one of those sayings. Flattery will get you everything or get you everywhere, something like that. 3 is thought. So if you're there to be a thought or an ideas person, well, deceit could absolutely be a shadow aspect of that, because obviously you can lie and you can promote your own ideas with an agenda. 4 can be melancholy and envy. And this makes a lot of sense because I've told you that number 4 is the number of death. 4 is the number of crisis and construction. So I could have gotten very, very sad, very melancholic back when I was the dean of nursing, when my role was to fire. I was firing a lot of people. And then I got to rebuild a beautiful team. But of course it can affect you and the shadow aspect of being sort of the crisis person could be melancholy and envy that maybe somebody else has a better, easier job. A number 5 is analysis and avarice. So that's like greed, and analysis, the shadow of fun. Because if this is growth and you don't analyze, it goes back to the discernment. If you're just having fun and growing, but you're not discerning, then that's a shadow aspect of a 5. Number 6 has to do with cowardice and fear. So if your role is to serve and you don't question your values, you can work in fear. And then you're not really serving, you're just doing it out of coward. Remember, these are the shadow aspects of the roles. The 7 is opportunity and gluttony. And when I mean opportunity, I mean like opportunism. So opportunism and gluttony are linked to 7 because if it's an introspective year and you're sort of supposed to be more introverted, if you will, doesn't mean you can't be extroverted, but I mean, it's more of an internal process. And here you are, glutton and party and opportunity, everything that arises, and you're not really doing inner work, then again, it's the shadow of that role. The 8 role has to do with vengeance and lust. And that can make sense because if it's power, the shadow side of power and money is wanting more and more and more, the lust, the vengeance. And number 9 is indolence and sloth. Why? Because if you know you're there for endings, you know that something's ending, you know that maybe you're just there for a short time, or you know that they're going to close your department, or you know your role is an ending, you might just be kind of indolent and lazy. So these are the shadow aspects to the roles. So if you know what the shadow aspect is of the role that you have at that job, and it links back to your core values, and it links back to your vision, and it links back to your purpose-driven sort of spiritual motivation, then now you have a shadow of which to work. And you can use the archetypes, your counsel, to help you. So the archetype of deceit would be Mercury. The archetype of melancholy would be Saturn. The archetype of analysis would be Chiron. The archetype of cowardice would be Mars. The archetype of gluttony would be Jupiter. The archetype of lust would be Venus. And the archetype of sloth would be the moon. So now you have an archetype linked to the role, and you could see why maybe that person at work bothers you. So I'm a 6, I would have to be maybe someone who's a Mars archetype. Maybe if I see someone who's very ambitious or someone who's very courageous, maybe if I'm judging them, it says to me, oh, that's more of what I want to be, or maybe I have to tone it down or something like that. So we use these shadow aspects to help us and how to use the workplace so that we can become the CEO and the COO of our life. So let me stop there and take attendance, and we'll pick up on Thursday.